Alright, imagine a puzzle game where jumping is not just how you move, but how you literally change the world around you. This is a 2D puzzle platformer that takes the simple act of pressing the jump button and turns it into a tactical nightmare. In a good way, I promise. It is simple, it is cheeky, and it might just make you question your own spatial awareness. Leap Tactics is a pixel art puzzle platformer developed by Mingri Studio, and it is built on the Godot engine. The core hook is brilliantly straightforward. Your character has a unique activation zone around them. When you jump, any mechanism inside that zone toggles its state. We are talking about 10 different jump-activated mechanisms, like blocks that appear and disappear, flows that switch between moving up and down, and even spiked blocks that rotate clockwise every time you leave the ground. There are over 80 levels in the full version, though I only played the demo, which gives you a solid 1 to 2 hours of gameplay. The developer intentionally kept the controls minimal, focusing on movement and jumping. You do not need to be a platforming god with frame-perfect precision, because the game is much more about the logic of the puzzle than the dexterity of your thumbs. It even includes an undo function, which is a godsend for people like me who tend to jump first and ask questions later. There is also a companion that jumps in sync with you, adding another layer of chaos to the pathfinding. The story behind the Mingri Studio is something I think many of you will relate to. The developer is not a professional in the industry. He actually has a completely unrelated career and developed Leap Tactics part-time as an independent enthusiast. This is his first complete commercial game, and the game goal was to learn the entire process of publishing on Steam. The idea actually started during a game jam with the theme Side Effect, which is such a cool way to start a project. The dev is a big fan of Jonathan Blow's Braid, and you can see that influence in the focus on a single powerful mechanic that is explored from every possible angle. He handheld almost everything alone, from the programming to the level design, only using royalty-free resources for some of the art and the music. He even mentioned a funny struggle with Godot's physics engine where objects were clipping through each other during fast movements. A classic dev headache that was eventually solved by finding the right collision parameters. It is a very honest approach to development, focusing on a unique core gameplay rather than trying to hide behind flashy assets or a complex story that might be too much for a solo creator to handle. The first thing that struck me about Leap Tactics is how intuitive it is. You do not need a 20-minute tutorial to understand what is going on. You see a block, you jump, the block changes, and your brain immediately goes, okay, I get it. I really appreciate that kind of immediate clarity in game design. It is a sign that the developer knows exactly what their core loop is. Also, the controller support is fantastic. If you have watched my videos before, you know I am a stickler for good joystick integration. And even though you only use a few buttons here, it feels snappy and responsive. For a solo project from someone who is not a full-time developer, the level of polish in the controls is already at a very high level. It is impressive to see how the jumping mechanic evolved from a simple game jam idea into a fully fleshed out system. Using Godot was a smart move here. The signal and the node system in Godot is perfect for this kind of decoupled design, where the player character needs to broadcast a state change to surrounding objects without making the code a giant spaghetti mess. Honestly, I did not find any major bugs or technical glitches, which is rare for a demo. Everything works as intended and the flow is smooth. However, I did hit a bit of psychological wall around level 13. The difficulty starts to ramp up there, and while the puzzles are still clever, I felt a slight dip in my motivation to push forward. It is not that the game becomes impossible, but rather that the internal drive starts to fade. I would love to see some extra incentives or rewards for clearing certain milestones. Since the game currently lacks a deep story, adding a small meta reward, maybe some lore scraps or a cosmetic unlock, could give the player that extra push to see what is behind the next door. When you are asking a player to solve 100 puzzles, they sometimes need a little treat, like a digital sugar cube, to keep them interested in the harder logic gates. This game is good for casual gamers who want a logic challenge that they can play at their own pace without feeling stressed about timer or precision. It is also a great study for beginner indie developers on how to take a simple mechanic and squeeze every drop of potential out of it. It is clear that a lot of hurt went into balancing the difficulty curve and making the experience as user-friendly as possible. The full game will eventually head to the Nintendo Switch too, which honestly feels like the perfect home for a puzzle like this. So, what do you think? Does a jump activated ward sound like a fun challenge or a recipe for a headache? Let me know what you think in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts on these indie gems. Thanks for watching.